Okay, so the kiln on the left currently is our smaller Paragon kiln. If you're working on smaller items, I recommend that you use this one just because it's less room to heat up. Before you get started enameling, it's a good idea to, very first thing, come in here and turn this on because it takes roughly 45 minutes to get up to temperature. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to flip on this main switch, and you have to wait for this to kind of cycle through. And so it takes a few minutes. And then once you see this flashing back and forth, you're ready to actually turn it on. So you're going to hit this start stop button a whole bunch of times, and it cycles through a whole bunch of different features, and I'll explain which ones they are. So the very first, you see it's idle. That just means it's ready, it's sitting there. Don't mess with this first setting. That means it's going to come on with its full power, and it's going to get up to temperature as fast as it can. The next is the temperature, and this is really important. The enamel flows at about 1450, 1500 degrees. So 1500 is kind of an average setting. Sometimes we set it a little bit lower. Sometimes if you're working on relatively large pieces in this kiln, you might want to set that up a little bit higher, because when you anytime you put a piece of metal in this, it's going to suck heat out for a minute, and then it needs to get back up to temperature. And then the last is the hold time, which I don't understand why that's so high. So the hold time is how long it's going to hold at that temperature. How long are you going to be in here working? For safety's sake, I like to set this at about 4 hours. That means this kiln will automatically turn itself off after 4 hours. If you're still in here working, you can easily turn it back on. And then when you see start, and then it doesn't come on until you see the word on, and you see this little run light blink. Now we see our temperature gauge, and when that temperature gauge hits 1500, you're ready to start enameling with this particular kiln. Okay, so next up we have our Vicella kiln. The Vicella kiln is a much larger kiln than the Paragon. So obviously it's primarily going to be used for enameling larger objects. But if the Paragon is in use, we can use this one as well. To turn the Vicella on, it's a lot more simple. It's just one switch, and it just comes right on. Now, to change the temperature, you simply change the arrows up and down. Now with this one, there is no timer on it. So it's incredibly important that you shut this down when you are done using it. Even if other people are in here working, make sure that whoever the last person using this is shuts it down. We can't have this thing running when no one's here. Okay, so you never want to enamel on a flat piece of metal, because what's going to happen is we build up layers of molten glass. There's usually a little bit more layers on the front than there will be on the back. When that glass cools, it's going to shrink, and when it shrinks, it's going to pull the corners of your flat piece of metal up. So you can avoid that warpage by sort of pre-forming your metal. And so since these are just kind of test samples, I don't really care what they look like. I'm not going to end up using them for anything. I'm just going to quickly form them here on this stump, and then clean it up just a little bit in the block. Okay, so a couple really important things to consider when you're enameling. Number one is your metal. Enamel will only stick on sort of pure metals. So we can only enamel on copper, silver, or steel in this studio. And so I'm starting with copper. Typically when you enamel, you're going to start by enameling the counter side, the back side of this. The reason why is if I enamel the front side and go to set those trivets up, the trivets are going to leave marks. If I enamel the back side first, then the trivets are going to hold the metal by its edges. So you always want to enamel the counter side first, but that has to be cleaned. We need to get all of the oils and greases from your fingers and you know, any impurities or anything like that needs to be completely scrubbed off. So the easiest way to do that is just under running water. I'm gonna just sprinkle. See how the water? Can you see how the water is beading up on there? That means it's dirty. When the water sheens evenly across the surface, it's not dirty. So I have a little bit of pumice powder and a little bit of baking soda, a Scotch-Brite pad here. You can throw a little bit of dish soap on this too if you want, but it's not really necessary. Okay, now I don't see that water puddling up anywhere. So I know that particular piece is clean. So I'm going to do that 3 more times. Get that wet. A little bit of baking soda. A little bit of pumice. Now I can only enamel on one side at a time, so I'm not really worried about the front side. I'm going to have to pickle and scrub that. Okay, so let me take a minute to talk about different firing rates. When the enamel goes into the kiln, you're going to sprinkle that enamel on like as a powder. Basically, those little granules of glass melt into each other. So when they first start to melt, and you can identify those individual granules, it's called sugar fire. Sugar fire is an under-fired technique where the granules of enamel have just barely melted into each other, and it really resembles sugar. Now, one of the things about sugar fire, all of the different rates of enameling are valid as a surface. You can intentionally underfire something. But if you want an underfired enamel to fuse to your metal, you have to have a layer underneath it that has been completely fired. You can't just have a sugar fire directly on top of the surface of the metal because it hasn't melted enough to fully bond to that metal. So when you see this granule sugar texture, that's called sugar fire. The next step is when those pieces of enamel start to kind of melt down into each other a little bit more. The next step is called orange peel because obviously it resembles an orange peel. It's still kind of bumpy, it has a nice texture to it, but it's fired at a little bit higher, at a little bit of a higher rate. The next step is just kind of generically called a complete fire. It's where the enamel has completely melted, it's fused, the surface is nice and smooth and shiny, and it's just a complete fire. And then the very last one is called overfiring. Basically, if you leave your piece of enamel in there a little too long, it starts to kind of burn a little bit, and you can get some really interesting results. Especially, you can identify that this is an overfire because of the burnt ring around the edges. It starts to burn from the edges first. It'll also start to burn from any like high points or ridges. And so here's a nice big transparent piece that had been overfired. And you see that kind of glistening gold color of the copper underneath. Now, once again, all of these techniques, all of these firing rates are valid. And there's a lot of different things that you can do. You can layer an underfired layer on top of an overfired layer. You can layer a transparent color on top of an opaque and build color that way. Talk about transparents and opaques a little bit. So a transparent is obviously when you see colors or the metal underneath it. An opaque color completely covers that surface. So you can layer transparent on opaque. You can layer opaque on opaque for stenciling purposes, something like this. Trying to get some nice little patterns and things like that. You can layer opaque over transparent, and you get some interesting effects that way because it makes that opaque color float above the surface a little bit. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about the enamels themselves. So basically, when you buy enamel, you have different options on how you can get it delivered. And this is kind of a standard 8-ounce container of enamel. They're anywhere between 15 to 50 bucks a piece. We're in a fortunate situation here where I supply the enamel to you. Most other schools require the students to purchase the enamels because they can be kind of expensive. We buy the enamels out of our budget, so we have a limited supply of enamels, but they're here for you to use. Don't overuse them, or don't waste them, I mean. So I have them divided in the cabinet between the opaques and the transparents. And what we do is I would prefer that you use these little containers, okay? Because one of the hazards in enameling is contamination of your colors. And I would rather risk contaminating this small amount in this little container than contaminating the large amount. Of course, you're gonna need to handle the larger containers to refill the smaller ones and so on, but we need to avoid contamination. Now, one of the things that I'm trying to do here is all of the opaque colors have white lids and all of the transparent colors have red lids. And we even put them, the numerical identification from Thompson Enamel is actually pretty handy to use because as those numbers increase and decrease, the colors change across the gradient there. And so I would really hope that you can keep the colors in order. Next, we have some of the tools that we use. So first and foremost, with enameling, you need to wear a dust mask. Your COVID cloth face masks are not sufficient. You need something that is more of a dust filter. If you have one of these bigger respirators, that's even better, but you need to wear a dust mask. We are sprinkling powdered glass onto metal, and you definitely do not want that in your lungs. We need something to adhere the glass to the metal. We need something to fix it so that it doesn't just fall off when we're moving it from the kiln. Thompson Enamel, which is the biggest company to supply enamels for metalsmithing, they have this stuff called Clearfire. Okay, and with the Clearfire, you just basically paint it on with a brush and sprinkle your enamel on top of that. It's nice because it doesn't dry too fast, and it's definitely stuff that's designed specifically for this purpose. I actually prefer to use Old Aquanet hairspray. It goes on quicker. It dries a little faster than the Clearfire, which I find to be a benefit. So I use the Aquanet. Next we have our sifters. So the sifters are how we get the enamel onto the piece. And so basically when we're sifting, let's say I have scrubbed this surface, it now has enamel on it, and I'm sifting. I can hold the sifter like this, and I'm basically going to go around the whole thing, or I can hold the sifter like this and sift. And the tapping is what knocks those little particles down. We have 3 different sizes of sifters, and we have 2 different sizes of mesh screens. You can see the screen inside there is a little bit different. This one's much finer than this one. And so this will allow bigger particles to fall through. This one will not allow those big particles to fall through. And we have all kinds of other tools. We have mortars and pestles, and you can grind things finer, all kinds of stuff like that. We have our stone. The stone is essentially the enamel eraser. So if something went on a little too heavy or you don't like it, you can always use the stone and basically grind that enamel away and either re-enamel or do something different on that side. Once we have sifted the enamel onto our piece, and I'm holding these like this because you never want to disturb the enamel, you need to set it on a trivet. A trivet is just a little piece of steel that holds the enameled piece while it's in the kiln. And then we put the trivet on a screen, and then this is a fork. Basically, some of them have these little hand guards, some don't. It's up to you if you want to use one with a hand guard or not. But basically, the fork is how we lift our enameled items in and out of the kiln. We have different sizes of trivets. There's all kinds of different ones in there. You know, you want to use the smallest one that you can, because putting an unnecessary amount of metal into the kiln, you're going to suck heat from that kiln every time you do that. Okay, so now I am ready to sift my enamel. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to apply our counter. And if you're wondering why my voice is a little muffled, it's because I'm wearing a dust mask. So you have 2 choices when it comes to your counter. You can use this, which is what we consider our counter enamel. And basically it's enamel that has been contaminated. So if you're concerned that your enamel got contaminated, put it in the counter. We want to try to avoid adding enamel to the counter. Okay, we want to try to do as much as we can to avoid contamination. This is, you know, the counter is all like weird speckly, you know, it's just kind of muddy colors. You never know what you're going to get. So one of the ways that we can A, avoid contamination, and B, conserve as much enamel as possible is to do all of our sifting over glossy paper. So I happen to have an old Rio Grande catalog here, and I just ripped some pages out, and that's what we're going to use to sift on. But before I'm doing anything, I have completely cleaned this area. No dirt, no old enamel, nothing like that is here. Nothing like that is going to be introduced into my colors. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to apply my fixative with old Aquanet hairspray. I'm going to open up my color. This time we're using the lovely robin egg blue. I like to hit the outer edges first. and then you want nice even coverage. For this particular one, we're using a color for our enamel. If your design is such that we're gonna see the back of that piece, you don't want to use the counter enamel. You want to use a color. You want to use a color that we're gonna see. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this and I'm gonna set it on my screen. Now, I don't plan on doing anything else with Robin Egg Blue. So I'm gonna go ahead and put it all back. The glossy magazine paper enables me to get more of those enamel particles back into the container. If you use sketchbook paper or typing paper, it's got a tooth to it, and the enamel won't roll across the edge as well. Since I'm not doing anything else with Robin Egg Blue, I'm going to put these pages in the recycling. Okay, so I don't know how this sound quality is going to be because I'm wearing a mask and we have our ventilation system on. You absolutely have to have the ventilation system on when you're operating the kilns. They put off fumes even when they're empty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load the Robin Egg Blue one into the kiln first, and we'll take it out. So I have my fork, I have my object, you want to put it in there as quickly as you can. Now, it was hovering right at 1500, and what you can do is you can watch the temperature just drop. So we're already down to 1429. We may lose 100 degrees each time we open the door and put something in there. Don't ever set down the stick. Holding the stick reminds you that there is something in the kiln. You know, we're down to 1407. Getting your timing is really important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a peek. Okay, and that glass hasn't even started to fuse yet. The timing is going to be different for every piece. A really small piece is going to come up to temperature very quickly. A very large piece is going to take a while. Okay, so when I look in there, the piece and the trivet are not glowing bright red yet. The kiln itself is starting to climb temperature-wise, and typically once it gets to, like, you know, 1430, 1450, you're probably going to be good. So I can see a little bit of glistening enamel on the metal. I'm going to give it just another second. If you pull your piece out too soon and it wasn't fired enough, you can easily just put it right back in. It's not going to hurt anything. Okay, so everything's glowing red. My enamel looks nice and smooth. I'm going to take the screen and I'm going to set it on this brick. We absolutely need to make sure we're putting our objects onto surfaces that can't combust. So I have some fire bricks here. I'm going to get some more in just a minute. Now I'm going to fire the one that has the counter enamel. Completely smooth, set it on the brick. Okay, so we're back over here at the sink. I've taken our freshly enameled pieces out of the pickle. Anytime you have bare metal, you have to scrub it before you enamel. Once I have enamel on this, the process speeds up very quickly, but anytime you have bare metal, you have to scrub it each time. So, just like before, I'll run some water, sprinkle some baking soda, sprinkle some pumice, I'm trying not to touch that surface. Okay, the test is when the water sheens completely across. Okay, so both of those are clean. I'm going to carry them up to the enameling kiln, and I'm going to avoid touching the surface that I just cleaned. Okay, so I'm here and I'm going to get set up for layering my top coat. So I'm going to start once again by getting some pages of gloss paper. Nice clean workspace. Get my sifter. Going to put on my mask. This time we're going with Twilight Blue. Very exciting color. Now this is another opaque color. You want nice, even coats. Here's my trivet. On the trivet, we're going to let that dry. Now, as I said earlier, once you have enamel on both sides of the metal, the process goes a lot faster. And so I can take a piece of metal that I have enameled and I can start having fun with it. Okay, so this has some sort of a transparent blue. I don't really know what it is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this little piece of lace down on top of this. And then I'm going to sift my Twilight Blue over that. And the lace will work like a stencil. So it's a little sloppy, but you get the idea. This has a pretty pronounced curve to it. Going to get another trivet. Now this next one, I'm going to switch back to a different color. I'm going to go with a transparent. Now, I got some enamel on the table. I can add that to the counter, but before I get another color, I need to clean this area. So from here out, it's all about experimentation. You want to sample everything. You want to experiment with different colors and different firing rates. You want to see what happens when you lay different colors on top of each other to create gradients or fade one color, you know, fading from one color to the next, or building up color with transparents, you know, that sort of thing. So I've placed the pieces up on top of the kiln, and that helps them dry a little quicker. It's pretty hot up here, just from the ambient temperature of the kiln, and so that just makes them dry a little faster so we don't have to wait as long. I usually recommend that you only fire one thing at a time. I haven't had that much luck putting multiple pieces in, because if one is just a little bit bigger than the other, the small one's going to get up to temperature faster than the big one, and you could end up with one that's overfired and one that's underfired. Okay, so it's at orange peel right now. But that's a base coat, so I wouldn't want to just stop. But if I was looking for an orange peel, that would have been a good one. There we go. Nice and smooth. Complete fire. Okay, now I'm going to put the next one in. Just going to peek at this. Not quite there. Okay, so we'll see if this is done. Oh yeah. See how smooth that surface is.